Hello and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Katherine and I'm currently a fourth year PhD student studying history at The Ohio State University. And today we are going to talk about what I've been doing this semester as a fourth year student, what that looks like for me, and also why I've been a little MIA. This semester has just been so super crazy. I have way too many jobs. I'm working for our department's online journal. I am grading. I took a class with my advisor and then I took another writing seminar to write my first chapter. And finally, as a fourth year student, I am proud to let you guys know I have finished the first draft, so still has a long way to go, but I finished the first draft of my first chapter. So we are officially in the writing stage. I obviously still have a lot of research to do, but to say that I'm writing just feels really good and really amazing. This semester, we have also had a lot of excitement just in our personal lives. We had 3 weddings to go to: a family wedding, a wedding that my husband was a groomsman in, best man, and then the other wedding he was the officiant for. And that was all in the span of 14 days. We drove to Toronto for the family wedding for my cousin, which was amazing. And then we immediately had the other 2 weddings. I took a trip to DC to visit some friends who live there. And then Andrew and I were pretty much sick for 3 weeks. He got COVID and then I got sick, but it wasn't COVID. So then I got Andrew sick again with my not COVID, whatever it ended up being. And then it was Thanksgiving and I had a lot of grading to do and we went down to Texas and it was really nice and really lovely. But all that to say is it has been a time. Besides being sick, I've also just still been dealing with a variety of health concerns. As you guys may or may not know, last year I was dealing with a lot of problems with my arms, which has not been resolved, and in periods it gets better and in periods it gets worse. And to be honest, one of the reasons I decided to pick up the camera today is because I've had really intense arm pain and I've just felt like crying and have cried. And I knew that I wouldn't cry if I broke out the camera. So I figured now's a good time for an update. And this is just gonna be a one-shot video because one of the other issues that I have discovered, which has prevented me from doing my own video editing, is my job for our online journal. I am creating a lot of educational videos based on articles that authors have written. I'm getting a lot of learning out of this. I'm learning how to use Premiere Pro and new video editing, but that can be very taxing on my arm. And so when I have to do a lot of work for that, it means that I don't really want to edit my own personal videos in the evenings, which is a little bit of a bummer because I've been hoping to be able to fill you guys in. I quite literally filmed probably 4 like full videos that will probably just never be posted because I was trying to do all these intense different editing shots that just aren't gonna happen with my wrists. I've also been going through some pretty intense stomach issues that landed me in the ER and still don't have answers for that, but have a lot of appointments with different doctors and specialists. All this to say is like doing a PhD fulfilling and also might wreck your body, so take that for what it is. I do want to talk a little bit later about the process of actually writing my chapter and how that experience has been, but I wanted to start off with just a big overview. But yeah, I do want to talk about my first chapter, so let's get right into that. New day, new turtleneck, but we are still going to talk about the first chapter. So first I want to talk about the process of the class. So the class is very scheduled and you begin with turning in a proposal, which I've done this for my other writing seminars as well. And while I don't think it's entirely necessary for every chapter that you do if you're not like taking a class, I actually do find the process super helpful. In the proposal, you begin with a historiography for that specific chapter, as well as explaining your methodology, how you're going to approach the chapter, what archives you're going to use, the structure of the chapter itself, how you're going to lay it out and organize it, as well as a bibliography. And I find this super helpful, A, for the other class papers that I've done, even though they haven't resulted in papers that are going to be like a full chapter. But even in those cases, I found it really helps me solidify my own ideas and my own argument. So making some sort of proposal, even if you're not turning it into anyone, I'm definitely going to be doing that for the rest of my chapters, whether I'm developing them in a class or not, because I find it super useful. And I wasn't able to get my argument right away, but it's definitely helped to crystallize some of those ideas and get feedback. From there, you write your introduction and your first 10 pages. In other classes, sometimes I've used a bunch of stuff from the proposal in the first 10 pages, but this time I kind of went a totally different route and just wrote a fresh 10 pages for the introduction of the chapter, partially because I think a lot of the historiography and background that I'm putting in chapter 1, or that I'm discussing in chapter 1, is actually going to go in the introduction. Some people aren't having an introduction, they're just putting all that information into their first chapter, but as of right now, I plan on doing an intro, so some of the necessary background information will have just been discussed. So I had that, and then after your first 10 pages, you go through a review process where you send it to 2 reviewers in your class. You have the same ones all semester, and you give feedback on their papers, and they give feedback on yours. This feedback loop is extremely helpful, especially because I got paired with people who are doing similar-ish things. Like, we're all kind of doing military history, but kind of not. But they're in very different fields than me. And I think having people review your paper who have very different fields is extremely beneficial because they see things that you might not see. They're able to identify gaps in your argument and point out things that might need a little more explaining to people who are outside of your field. So after you submit the first 10 pages for part 1, you have like 2 to 3 weeks to write part 2, and then you submit part 2, get feedback, have another few weeks, and then submit part 3. After part 3, you will have written at least 30 pages, roughly. Mine came out to be a bit longer than that. And then you have another week to work on just your conclusion. In sum, my first chapter ended up being around, I want to say like 42 pages. And it is far from being done, but I'm super happy with what I was able to produce this semester. After discussing the mechanics of the class, I just want to get into my top tips of things that I learned throughout this semester and things that I think will help other people when they're writing, whether it be a chapter or an article. Okay, tip number 1 is you know more than you think you do, just start writing. I think one of the problems I have when writing and through this whole PhD process, honestly, is because I know there's so much out there that I don't know, I feel like I still need to wait for more data collection, need to do more secondary research, I need to go to the archives more. There's so many things I feel I have to do before I can start writing, when in all honesty, I actually know a lot more than I think I do, and I just need to start somewhere. Which leads me to sub-point number 2, like you can't edit a blank page. As long as you have something on a paper, you can edit it, and that's where you really begin to start the process. But until you've started writing, you're not going to be able to get to the point where you can refine your ideas. Okay, point number 2. Always know what you're going to write the next day. So granted, I wasn't always super good at this, but I was like 10 times more successful when I did do this. And this was a tip that our professor gave us. So whenever you're at the end of the day and you're getting ready to close up for the next day, be sure you already know where your ideas are going next. I think sometimes whenever I stop just because I'm so tired and I'm done with a section, if I don't know where I'm going next, the next day I'm just gonna spend half of my time rereading and trying to figure out what I said the day before. Whereas if I end the day, even with just like jotting down either what the next section is going to be or write the first like 2 intro lines for the next paragraph, I found I was much more successful in actually being able to produce good-ish content each day I was writing. Okay, number 3, my next tip is regarding editing. For editing, whenever you go back and revise your paper, your article, your chapter, I would suggest either A, printing it off, or if you have an iPad, putting it on your iPad in some sort of PDF format. I personally find it so much easier to catch mistakes when I'm physically going through and marking it up rather than just on the computer, and I find I catch a lot more of my own mistakes when I do that. So that would be my next tip for editing. Make sure you're actually having a physical act with a pen or like an Apple Pencil in your hand while you're editing, because you will catch so many more mistakes. Tip number 4 is something I already mentioned: get feedback from people in other fields. I even get feedback from my husband. He's not in my field, so he's not really giving me any content tips per se. It's more just like clarity things, which again is super helpful for someone who is not in your field, because you might be assuming a lot of things that the reader should know when they really don't. And finally, my final tip, tip number 5, is to be confident and clear in your contribution. I find in my writing, and this is, I'd be curious to hear other people's experiences with this, because in some ways I do feel like it is partially a gender thing, but I find myself and other female students who I would be working with tend to really downplay our contributions much more than the men in the class. And I know this is probably not true across the board, but we would have so many qualifiers before we would even present A, an argument in our paper, or B, just verbally talking about our projects in class. We would downplay ourselves so much, which is kind of really sad. That's a whole nother statement on society and the world. When we really had good arguments to make, and that could have been made clearer if we had gone in with a little more confidence. So whenever you're writing, find what your contribution is, because you definitely have one, and then B, figure out how to articulate best what that contribution is. It might take a few revisions. It does take time in learning how to do that and how to pitch yourself, but ultimately you and your work are going to be all the more better if you can be more assertive in stating how you're filling a gap in the research and how your argument is contributing to the field or to whatever sector that you are working and producing scholarship in. Okay, this video was a lot between where I've been and also a brief recap on my first chapter. I hope to have more videos coming your way soon. If you have any specific ones that you'd like to see, please let me know down below in the comments. And I'll see you next time. Bye.